Hello, everyone. My name is Bob Warach, and welcome to the Docket. The Docket's a series we are presenting that deals with legal issues in the community and how some community organizations work with the courts. I don't know if our audience is familiar with that, but there are a number of them, and we hope to explore that. Today, we're going to start off by discussing CASA. CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates, and we have the development director, Erik Baray, and Wendy Seigel, who is one of the current volunteers. So let's get started. Hi, welcome to the Docket. Let's begin with our guests today. We have Erik Baray, the development director, and we have Wendy Seigel, who is a CASA volunteer. I think we'll start with Erik, and he'll give us an idea of what the organization does, when it was established, how it's actually organized, and how it participates in our community. Erik.
Absolutely. CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates, as you just mentioned. It started in the mid-'70s in Seattle, Washington, and here in El Paso, it started in the mid-1980s. So we're going about 35, 36 years of providing this program to the El Paso community, especially the local foster youth. We are a volunteer-based program. We look for compassionate and dedicated individuals who would like to advocate on the behalf of foster youth that are currently going through the family court system.
Okay, so explain what you mean. I know you just tried to, but foster youth. So this is when a child is removed from the family?
Yes, so once a child is in foster care, that means they are no longer under the guidance and protection of their biological parents. They have been removed from their parents' care by Child Protective Services and are placed in foster care with another licensed foster family or possibly kinship care with extended family members.
Okay, and then when do you get notified of that?
Well, we have a close relationship with CPS. So as soon as CPS gets a call and there's an investigation about child abuse or neglect in a particular home, they do their proper due diligence, policies and procedures, and they need to deem it necessary in order to remove the child from the home. And they let us know when that's happening to give us a heads up that there's a new child or children, because it might be a sibling group, coming into foster care. Because as a CASA, we want to be there with them from the beginning of their journey in the family court system. So we know early on, as soon as they're removed from the home, we do communicate with CPS, and from there we have a trained and prepared volunteer to become their advocate.
CPS is Child Protective Service.
Correct.
All right, now you were talking about a trained volunteer. That would be Wendy, is that
Absolutely.
right? And Wendy, tell us a little bit how you got involved.
Well, I had always heard about CASA. I have friends who've been in the CASA program, and I saw advertisements on television. And when I retired from school teaching, I realized that I still wanted to have an impact on children's lives. And so I went through the CASA training.
How intensive is that training?
It's about, how many hours is it?
A total of 30 to 35 hours of training prior to even serving on a case.
Okay.
So we do prepare each volunteer thoroughly, and we make sure that they have all the knowledge that they need to start a case.
Wendy was a school teacher. Do you need any particular background to do this?
This volunteer program is open to any adult in El Paso as long as they're the age of 21 and they pass a series of background checks and complete training. But every compassionate and dedicated adult is welcome to apply for this program, whether if you're 21 or 65, a school teacher, an engineer, a nurse, even if you're military, retiree, if you want to give your time after retiring, we're open to pretty much any adult that has a passion for helping kids.
So, Wendy, what kind of commitment did you have to make to do this? I mean, now we've heard about the training you go through.
It is not an overwhelming commitment, but it is a time commitment. But I find the work to be very rewarding. I work with a supervisor who guides me through every detail of every case, and I'm fortunate to have a supervisor that is really on top of it and nurtures me so that I can nurture my charges. I write I write up my cases. I take notes on every detail whenever I talk to a parent, a foster parent, the children, an attorney, an educator, a doctor. Any interaction that I have with anyone in regard to my advocacy, I write up pretty detailed notes. So I go on visits. I actually, now that I'm fully vaccinated, I'm able to visit with children in their homes. I observe
That must have been a
visits.
challenge during COVID.
Well, it was, and what happened is that as the rest of the world went virtual, CASA went virtual as well. So even court cases were done virtually. I kind of had to learn very quickly how to do that along with everybody else.
Right.
And it was a challenge, but we rose to it. Now I visit my children. I have cases that children are far away, so I FaceTime with them, and nothing is as good as being there in person, but we try to do the best we can given the situation.
Talking about far away, didn't you have a case where the children were moved to another state?
Yes, I did. And so I just continued because the case originated here in El Paso.
So we retain jurisdiction.
Absolutely. So I follow along there, and it's wonderful to be able to see how well they're doing in their current placement.
Erik, how are you notified of it? I know you talked about you get notified, then you insert yourself as a CASA program, but how does this notification process start? How does somebody determine, I think this child needs help?
Well, there's the CPS hotline. If any human being in our community suspects that there's child abuse or neglect happening, they can anonymously call this hotline, and then once they
That's important though. It's anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
It's never disclosed who has made the report. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
Oh, no,
stop you
absolutely.
going.
You're fine. So a phone call is made, and then once that phone call is made, CPS does their job, and they conduct the proper investigations. And then once that is done, we're just in constant contact with them. If there's a situation going on, they let us know that a removal might be happening, then they prepare us, and for us to be prepared as CASAs so that we can have volunteers ready to serve on the case.
So the volunteer would appear, I guess is a question for you, Wendy. The volunteer would appear at the first court hearing on removing the child from the home?
If it's possible, yes, that's how it works. And then you get all of the notes involved with the case, and then you immediately start your advocacy.
But prior to that first hearing, when you show up, you have no previous
Correct.
information. You've not spoken to anyone.
Correct.
So what's the first thing you do after the hearing?
The first thing that you do is you begin your advocacy. My job, bottom line, I'm guided with doing what is best for the child. So I try to meet all the different people in that child's life, explain my role, and talk about how what we want is what you want, what is best for the child. So in doing that, I might have conversation with the biological parent. I would speak to the placement parents, the foster parent or kinship parents. I would immediately develop a relationship with CPS, and we all join forces. If the child is in school, I would talk with the educators. I would talk to any kind of therapist or doctors involved. I just think the way you understand it best for me is to think of yourself as a loving parent. What would you do? You're not the parent, you're outside, but what would you do to make sure—
If you were the parent.
If you were the parent, to make sure that this child's needs are being met properly.
Are most of the placements with foster care or with kinship care?
I don't know. I've had a good mix of both. So I don't know what statistically it is, but I've worked with both foster parents and kinship parents.
I don't know which one of you can answer this. I know that you said, Erik, earlier that a CASA has to go through a background check. What about the foster parent? I'm assuming if you're in the foster parent area, you've gone through these checks. But what about with the kinship check? Do they first have to go through a background check?
Yes, they do their proper checks and make sure that they're, first off, willing to take in that child or children into their home to be under kinship care. And same thing with foster families. They go through their own training and licensing with the state to become foster parents in order to take in kids. But same thing with kinship care. They just want to make sure that they have everything good to go in order to care for those children.
So I'm just trying to figure out a process here. If I were a grandparent and the child had to be removed immediately, but I had not had a background check previously, first that child would have to go to foster care, and then I would have to go through a background check before the child could be placed with me, even if I am a blood relative. Is that correct?
I just want to it's all for the safety of the child, just to make sure they're in good hands. And of course, there's temporary placements that happen in that early process before everything is set and for the child to stay in one place.
And all of these children obviously are under the age of 18.
Yes.
What is the most common age range that you deal with, Wendy?
You know, I have dealt with newborn babies all the way to, I had a 12-year-old. So it varies.
But that's been the oldest for you, a 12-year-old?
For me, a 12-year-old.
Are you aware of other kids being older that were in CASA?
Yes, all the way up to 18, as a matter of fact.
I imagine, though, the older they get, the more input they would have in how they wanted to be cared for.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
They can express, and you know, especially with school-age children, they can talk to me about their fears and what they like, their likes and their dislikes and their challenges. And for me, it's very important for them, the children, to understand that it's okay to say that you're afraid of being back with your parent,
right,
or that you want to go back to your parent. And you know, it's very hard for them to say these things. They go through a lot of guilt feelings and feel like maybe they're causing their parent to be in trouble. And it's our job to help them to understand that none of this is the child's fault.
It's a big responsibility.
It's a big responsibility.
And I imagine that the knee-jerk reaction from a child would be, I want to be back with my parent. And it's got to be difficult for you to negotiate that when you know that at that current time, that's not the best decision for the child to make.
You know, we make sure that children are given the proper tools to navigate through such a very difficult time. So therapy is available for the children, for the parents, absolutely, who have been, you know, the goal for parents is to be reunited with their children. We hope that's their goal. So CPS works closely with parents to make sure that they receive services so they can accept the challenges that had the child removed from their care and perhaps rehabilitate and be reunited. Likewise, I advocate for the child. For example, we work with ECI, which is Early Child Intervention, to see if there are any therapeutic needs that need to be met by the child when they're younger than 3.
Okay, when you talk about early childhood intervention, is that still done through CASA, or is that a separate and apart organization?
There's other organizations. CASA doesn't handle that directly, but we do partner with a lot of other nonprofits or community services that can provide this type of support to families. So we reach out and we do our research to see where we can recommend families to go for those particular services.
As a general rule, who makes the reports, if you know? Is it doctors? Are they teachers? Brothers, sisters, grandparents, aunts, uncles?
I think as a retired school teacher, I can tell you that oftentimes it is educators who see these children every day and they make that call, that anonymous call. Yes. And also it is family members, neighbors. It can be anybody who sees something that just doesn't sit well. And I think we're all obliged to, morally, to make that, and legally, to make that call if you see abuse.
Do you get a lot of this with, does CASA get involved in divorce actions? Does CASA, are you getting a lot of divorced parents calling and reporting the other parent?
I'm not aware of something like that.
I'm not too aware, but I'm sure things like that have happened. But at that point, we just need to really put our focus on the kids.
Right.
And if it's something that needs to be resolved between the parents, then their attorneys and so on and so forth handle those situations. But we're mainly looking out for the best interest of the child. And then, of course, we communicate with everybody in the family, parents, just to make sure that we're on the right track. And, of course, communicating with the judge.
Are you required by law to, well, actually, only it comes to you through CPS, correct? Mm-hmm. So you're not the first point of, it wouldn't be that somebody would call CASA and say,
Correct.
We think this child's being abused. They would call Child Protective Services.
Correct.
Child Protective Services would then call you.
Yeah, highly, we recommend that they always call CPS first. And then, of course, if it's an emergency, they always need to call 911 first if it's something dire.
Is CPS, I don't know if you know that, and we'll talk about more of the legalities about this in a minute, but is CPS, if you know, required to follow up on every single report?
As long as there's a call, absolutely. Sometimes there might not be signs of dire abuse, if you will, for lack of better terms, but they do need to check up on
every call that comes in.
Just because they don't want to miss anything. And then, of course, if it results in a removal, then they go through the process. Foster care, they let CASA know.
Okay, well let's go back now. Let's talk about the legalities for a bit, because I know Wendy, being a CASA, is thrown into the middle of these legalities, never having gone to law school. So, what is a removal? Explain a removal.
A removal is what we call a 262 case. So that's the legal jargon. That's the code that they call a removal. And of course, authorities will analyze the situation, and if the child's needs are not being met or if there's a danger, they will be removed from the home at that time.
But they have to prove that, and this is when you're involved, Wendy, that has to be proved in court, correct?
Right.
The CPS may say we want a removal, but the judge has to order the removal, correct? You're not the only one representing the child's best interest in court, is that correct?
Absolutely not.
Who else is there?
The child is assigned an attorney ad litem.
Okay. An attorney ad litem is working for what he feels the best interests of the child are, what the best interests are, and what the child wants, correct?
Correct.
So the child, let's get back to what we had talked about before. 9 times out of 10, I suppose, I could be wrong, the child's going to say, I want to go back with my parents.
Correct.
The attorney ad litem may have an obligation to present that to the judge. You may feel entirely opposite, correct?
Correct.
How does that come out in court?
You know, I don't have anything in the game. I'm a volunteer, and that's why CASAs came about, because they wanted somebody who just is completely unbiased and driven solely not for a paycheck, or I'm not married to anybody in this case.
What's the best interest of the child?
Absolutely.
In your opinion.
Right. And so I oftentimes have more time than perhaps an attorney might to really become familiar with a child, to accompany the child to a therapy session perhaps, or to speak very closely with foster parents, and so to talk to teachers. I just spread out and get to know very well what this child's needs might be and what this child really, really needs, and to break that barrier of being afraid so that I can understand what is best for the child. And sometimes I've had to encourage a child, you know, when I thought the child might be going back to a very abusive home, where there was no chance where that child's needs might be met. I do recall speaking to a child and saying to that child, you know what, it's okay for you to say that you feel better about being in this home rather than going home. If you have to decide, I don't want to tell the child what is good for the child, but maybe allow that child to evolve to see what is best for him or her.
And think about their situation.
Absolutely.
So, who are you only in one court?
I have 2 cases currently.
Right, but in the same court is what I'm
Right,
asking.
yes.
And is it only that court that hears the Child Protective Services
Right,
cases?
not always the same judge, but yes, the same
Okay,
court.
and who are the 2 judges?
We work with the 65th District Court. We work with
Is that Yara Gutierrez?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Judge Yaraliso Gutierrez and Richard Ainsa, Judge Richard Ainsa.
Okay, and either of them can hear these cases. And how many? So, how do they have an attorney? How is the child given an attorney? The attorney ad litem.
The court system assigns the
So
attorneys.
these are attorneys that have signed up with Child Protective Services to be on what we call a wheel.
Exactly.
And so when a case comes up, a report is made, a removal is filed, CASA is notified, court hearing is held. Whoever comes up next on that wheel will be the ad litem for the child. Is that correct?
I believe that's how it works.
And, I've never done Child Protective Service work, but I've done a lot of Adult Protective Service work and a lot of ad litem work in that regard and at the psychiatric center. And I know that I have to have certain preparation. I have to be authorized to be an ad litem. I'm assuming the people who do the child protective work do the same thing. Do you have any idea about that?
I believe so. They are well versed. I have never been in a situation where I was speaking with an attorney who wasn't well versed and who didn't rely a lot on my findings. And we're working, I think, together in what's in best interest.
And as you said, it's probably incredibly helpful for the attorney to have your input because you have, like you said, you have 2 cases right now. That attorney may have one of those cases in Child Protective Services, but have a whole practice that he's trying to manage at the same time.
Absolutely, and I think they get to know you, and once they establish that you're somebody who can be depended upon to tell them what is honest and fair, they are wise enough to rely on CASAs who can report to them in the best interest of these children.
And what are your requirements in terms of how often you have to see?
So it's a minimum of visiting children once a month and reporting to attorneys once a month. But I go above that because I feel like I really want to get to know children. When we were before COVID and things were done much more actively as far as visitations and things like that. So, but you are communicating with all sorts of different people, and it's frequent, as much as you possibly can.
Do you find the people that you're involved with receptive, that they're all working towards the same goal? Do you get a lot of reticence? Do you, are people mad? I assume that if a child is removed from his parents, the parents are not particularly happy about that.
That's correct. My experience has been as soon as you establish yourself as somebody who is on the same page as they are, and you're never confrontational, you're saying, this is a very difficult situation, and I find that I try to present myself as an empathetic figure because I am. You never know what kind of hardballs life is going to throw you. Parents oftentimes have mental health issues or drug addictions. I mean, nobody wants to be in the situation that many of these parents find themselves in. And I'm communicating with them and I'm encouraging with them, but I tell them that I'm here to fight for what is best for your child. And I'm encouraging with parents to complete services and work with their CPS caseworker so that if everything goes well in a perfect world, they'll be rehabilitated and be ultimately
And have their child
reunited
back,
with their
yeah.
child. Sure.
What are you a witness actually in court, or do you simply make a presentation to court? In other words, are you available like for cross-examination, that sort of stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I am available, and of course the parent has an attorney, and CPS has an attorney, and the child has an attorney. And yeah, that was kind of the most challenging part for me when I first had to go to court and testify, and the judge is very interested in the opinion of the CASA.
Oh, I would think so. Yeah. And when do you give a written report that the judge has before
Right.
these various hearings?
Correct.
And you said something interesting I hadn't thought of. Of course, the parent's entitled to an attorney, but is an attorney appointed for them, or do they have to go out and hire an attorney?
Typically, it's a court-appointed attorney. Back to the wheel that you were talking about.
Okay, so there's a wheel for the parent, there's a wheel for the kid, and there's you.
And there's me.
Yeah.
I'm wheelless.
You're wheelless. Do you recommend this to people? I mean, would you encourage people to contact CASA and become a volunteer if they have any interest in this regard?
I absolutely do. I think it's something you do with eyes wide open. I know that typically my friends say to me, I don't know how you do this. How do you sleep at night? What does it do to your stomach? I mean, how do you see it? But the converse is, how do you not do it?
Right.
You know, I have time on my hands. It fulfills me. I meet very interesting people. I get to have great
Get to be on television?
conversations. I had my television debut. But above all, I know that ultimately I hope to be making a difference in a child's life. And I've met some wonderful, wonderful children who have been in the most challenging times of their life, and to have an impact and perhaps nurture them and help them to have a happy, good, positive life, then it's what could be more rewarding volunteer work than that.
Well, I think that sounds great, and you're encouraging people to look into it, perhaps.
Certainly.
So in a minute, I'm going to ask Erik to give us, the contact information for anybody who's watching who might be interested. But I just want to mention now that I'm going to contact both Judge Gutierrez and Judge Ainsa, and perhaps try and get somebody who was on the wheel, one of the ad litem attorneys, to come in and talk. And so we can get their perspective on this too. I do know they're very supportive of CASA, and they love CASA, and thank you for doing this. Thank you for running the organization. Or I don't know if you run it, but thank you for being in the administration. But if anybody is interested, Erik, in wanting to be a CASA volunteer and get more information, what is your contact information? Give me your phone number first, and then perhaps a website they can go to.
Our phone number is 915-225-5214.
225-5214.
Correct. And then, of course, easiest way is online to fill out the application, because that is mandatory. So if you go to casaofElPaso.org.
I want to say it once more. Casa of El Paso, all one word.
Correct. All together.
.org.
.org. Correct.
Okay.
And they need to fill out the application. Now, it's a little lengthy, but it's giving us a snapshot of who you are. And that's the very first step in becoming a CASA, submitting the application, which I will receive. And then we'll conduct a pre-screening interview to discuss all the program details that are involved in this volunteer program.
Thank you for joining us at the Docket, and we look forward to presenting another program soon, hoping to see you then.